perhaps one of the best incentives that we have for historic preservation for owners of historic properties. And so we'll get into all the details about that. I took a look at the registration list earlier today, and what's really nice about some of these virtual events that we've been doing in the past year is that anyone from anywhere can join us. And so it's so nice to see so many of you from the Southern Tier, some of whom I've talked with before, but it's really also very nice to see folks from other areas of New York State. And so certainly, everyone is welcome, and there are tons of qualifying properties in New York. And so we'll talk all about that as we go through the presentation. So I work for the New York State Historic Preservation Office, which is part of the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. So we are the state agency that is tasked with providing safe and enjoyable recreational and educational opportunities for New Yorkers and visitors. We steward the natural environment. We also are the stewards of historic and cultural resources. So the State Historic Preservation Office is charged with advancing historic preservation efforts across New York. So in order to do that, SHPO offers programs and services that help individuals and communities achieve the social, economic, and environmental benefits associated with historic preservation. And so the tax credit is just one example of one particular program that we run, but we offer lots of different opportunities and services. So there are a couple basics about the tax credit. The homeowner tax credit program is a 20% tax credit program. And so basically what this means is that the credit will cover up to 20% of qualified rehabilitation expenditures for repairs and upgrades to your historic home. So if you are a historic building owner, you know that there is a lot of maintenance and upkeep and sometimes renovation projects that are required. And many of those types of projects will qualify for a tax credit under this program. A tax credit is a little bit different than a tax deduction. It's a dollar for dollar reduction in the amount of New York State income taxes that you owe. So it's a reduction in your final tax bill, whereas a tax deduction is a decrease in the amount that you are taxed. So if your adjusted gross income is below $60,000, then what'll happen is the credit will be applied to your final income tax bill, but the remainder will be taken as a refund. So there are a couple different ways to claim this credit. There are some eligibility concerns, and those are things that we definitely want to talk about, because this is how you'll enter into the program and apply for it. So first and foremost, this credit is for New York State taxpayers only. So if you pay income taxes in a different state, but you own property in New York State, then maybe this isn't the program for you, but you can certainly tell your friends and neighbors about it. Another important qualifying factor is that the building, the homeowner occupied building, has to be listed in the state and national registers of historic places. So either individually or in a historic district. New York State has some of the most historic districts in the nation. There are historic districts all over the place, and certainly we at SHPO can help you determine if your building is listed in a historic district, but so can the Preservation League. The other qualifying factor is that the building has to be located in what's called a qualifying census tract. And this is basically an area that has been determined as eligible for the tax credit because the New York State median family income, or the income in the area is either at or below the New York State median family income level. So the way it works out is that much of upstate New York actually falls within a qualifying census tract because we have significantly higher incomes downstate and in New York City. But there are some downstate census tracts that also qualify for this program. So that is something that we can help you look up when you're interested in pursuing an application, but those are the two major qualifying factors. The building has to be listed on the National Register and it has to fall within a qualifying census tract. So some basics about the program. In order to make a complete application, you have to spend at least $5,000 on qualified projects. And you have to do at least 5% of the total work that you're doing on your property on the exterior. And that is because there has to be some type of public benefit since this is a public tax credit program. The good news about this is $5,000 is a significant amount of money. You can apply and build up enough expenditures over a period of time to meet that $5,000 threshold, or you can apply for the credit every year if you're doing a lot of work on your property and you're going to be continuously meeting that eligibility requirement. So those are also things that we can discuss with you when you are making your application. Some other basics are that your application has to be pre-approved by our division staff before the work begins. So there are a couple different representatives in the homeowner tax credit unit. It's myself and a couple other people, and we all serve different territories. My territory is the Southern Tier, so if your home is in the Southern Tier and you're doing a tax credit application, it'll be me who's reviewing it, but we have other folks that cover different areas of the state. And we all work together to make sure that we're processing everyone's applications and providing technical assistance. So we ask that you submit work items, a description of work items to our office on an application form before the work begins. But one thing that I like to make very clear to everyone who applies to the program is that we believe that your health, safety, and welfare at home comes first. So if you have an emergency situation, then there are certain circumstances where it's okay to go ahead and get started on your work items before you actually submit an application or have a formal approval. And those are things that we can discuss on a case-by-case basis, but we certainly understand that scheduling conflicts happen, emergency situations happen, and the goal of this program is to help you take the best care of your property, and that also means taking the best care of yourself at your property. So that is something that I just always like to mention when I'm giving these presentations. So there are some fees that are associated with the application, and it's always $25 for the first part, and then the third part, the first and second parts, and then the third part is based on your final expenditures. But we'll go over some major details about the application form towards the end of this. You don't have to take the credit in the same year that you apply. As I mentioned, you can keep your application open for a couple of years and build up enough expenditures, or you can keep adding to it, or you can take the credit every year. It just depends on what works best for you. And so these are things that our staff is certainly willing to talk over with each individual applicant, because everybody's home and everybody's project situation is different. So when we get down to the bottom of typical work that qualifies, there is a ton of different stuff that qualifies for this program. It's really, really comprehensive. But basically, everything has to be on the home itself, on or in the home itself. So things that are not part of the original building footprint, those won't qualify. But when we talk about exterior work items, we're thinking about things like structural systems, so foundation repair, roof repair, floor joists and ceiling or attic rafters, things that have to do with major structural systems, roof coverings, and exterior walls. Some other examples of work that qualifies, we have a lot of porches in New York State, stoops, window rehabilitation or replacement, masonry work. There are lots of interior work items that would apply as well, such as floors, walls, stairs, ceilings, trim, and paint. Systems are also an extremely important part of your home, so mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, heating, ventilation, insulation. We get a lot of questions about insulation and weatherproofing. And solar panel installation actually also qualifies for the program. But when we're talking about solar panels, we want to remember that the goal of the Historic Homeowner Tax Credit Program is to help maintain the historic integrity of a property. So when we're installing solar panels, they shouldn't be visible from a principal elevation or where the public can generally see them. But there are a lot of costs associated with the installation of these panels that will qualify. There are some work items that don't qualify, and these are things that we'll go over with you when you are applying for the credit. Things that are separate from the building, as I mentioned earlier, so things like landscaping, fencing, additions to other work. outside the historic building footprint, or work that doesn't meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. So the way that I've heard colleagues describe this before is that if you were to take your house and turn it upside down and shake it, things that would fall out of the building or things that wouldn't be part of the building otherwise wouldn't qualify for the program. So when we talk about kitchen expenses, things like removable appliances, furniture, decor, those kinds of things won't qualify, but permanent fixtures, features, and installations at the property will. Other work that doesn't qualify is work that doesn't meet the Secretary of the Interior standards, and we will talk about what those are right now. So the Secretary of the Interior standards are a series of 10 standards that we sort of live by as preservationists. These are issued by the National Park Service, and the standards are meant to guide decision-making about historic properties when changes are to be made through a rehabilitation project. So there's 10 standards, but it really boils down to 3 basic concepts. We want you to retain existing historic materials. We want you to repair damaged historic materials, and we want you to replace materials only if they have deteriorated beyond repair, and they should be replaced in kind if possible. So if you have a slate roof, we're going to ask you to make repairs to that roof with slates, for example. So when we talk about retaining exterior features, one standard says the historic character of a property should be retained and preserved. The removal of historic material or the alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property will be avoided. So your home has a series of character defining features, no matter what type of historic property it is. Perhaps it's something like a porch, certain types of windows, a certain design, architectural details. Those are all things that characterize and define your property. So if you were to change them, you would significantly alter the appearance of your property. And that is what we're trying to avoid here. When it comes to interior spaces, there are also character defining features for those, and we want you to maintain those features as well. So things like stairways, fireplaces, molding, plaster, and historic floor plans. We don't want you to knock down all of your walls and turn your beautiful Victorian home into something that's like mid-century modern or open concept. We want to maintain the historic character of the property. So we're going to help you avoid making those kinds of changes if you're using this program. So one thing that comes up a lot is the topic of window replacement. Windows are often proposed for replacement, but we will always remind you that a repaired wood window offers the same energy efficiency as a replacement, and thus retains the historic building fabric and character. Windows, we say they're like the eyes of a property. So if a building has character defining feature windows, and those are going to be changed, that will significantly alter the appearance of the building overall. Sometimes windows are deteriorated beyond repair and they do have to be replaced, but we will work with you to find the best possible solution for that property, whether or not it's windows that are wood, similar to how the originals were. There's lots of different types of products on the market, whether it's aluminum clad wood. There are some fiberglass options that are very nice. There's all different types of composite materials that are acceptable. Vinyl windows are something that we get asked about quite often, and vinyl windows, unfortunately, just really aren't acceptable for historic properties, and so those won't be allowed in this program. But again, we will work with you to help you find the best possible solution, because we also want you to be making smart decisions and investments at your historic property. The other thing that we're going to help you steer clear of are damaging treatments, because there are all different types of things that you can do, sometimes unintentionally, that will damage your property, such as sandblasting brick. It can cause significant damage. We get a lot of questions about masonry repairs and things like masonry sealants. So we might give you some certain advice to help you avoid damaging treatments, or just recommend a better course of treatment for a specific problem that you're having. So it's also a nice opportunity to get some technical assistance when it comes to taking care of your historic property, because we do have a lot of resources that we can offer you as you're going through this process. So when things do deteriorate beyond, oops, sorry, went one too quickly. Oftentimes when things do deteriorate beyond repair, you will have to end up replacing something. And this is where we'll ask you to replace in kind. So if you need to replace a deteriorated feature, we will ask that it matches the old one in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. So things like porches or other exterior features that are made out of certain materials, we'll ask you to replace with the same materials. So another thing that's really important, and this is why this program is so great, it's designed to be flexible, it's designed to work with you and your specific situation at your home. The tax credit does not expect you to go back in time and replace what is not there. So if you buy a historic property that has been completely gutted, we are not going to ask you to go back and recreate a perfectly historic recreation of what was there. And this really applies a lot when it comes to things like kitchens and bathrooms, because kitchens and bathrooms have changed rapidly over time. Those are rooms that have evolved constantly in people's homes. New materials and designs are appropriate when there is no more historic integrity that exists in the space. So you work with what you have. Because we don't expect you to live in a museum. We don't expect you to go back in time and live in the same area that your house was built. There are a lot of ways to make modern and comfortable upgrades to your home, but still use this program. This is about rental units, and it is possible to use the credit if you have a rental unit in your home. I know in certain historic districts in New York State, we have a lot of multifamily properties, and the program is definitely usable if you do not occupy 100% of your property. There's just a few extra rules and calculations that we are going to ask you to consider. So I know there's a lot of words on this slide, and certainly if anyone is interested in a copy of these slides, I know that we can certainly get you a PDF or some information about this presentation. So every tax credit application will ask how much of your property you occupy, because not everyone occupies 100% of their property. We have a lot of folks that have rental units, or perhaps you have a home office or some other space that you use in your home to make income. What you submit to our office should definitely match what is on your taxes. That is also something that I will remind all of my tax credit applicants. And when you prepare your scope of work, you should remove any expenditures that are associated with the interior of the space that you rent. So the space that you do not occupy as a homeowner. They will not be reviewed or counted towards your project total. And as for exterior spaces, they're all going to be charged at the rate that is equal to the percentage of square footage that you occupy. So I know that that's a mouthful, but if you live in a duplex and you rent out 50% of your property and you replace your roof, and the roof replacement costs $20,000, you can submit for a credit towards $10,000 or 50% of that roof expense. But again, these are things that your SHPO representative can help you with when you are working on your project, because it's different for everyone. And we really do aim to make this as easy as possible. There is a commercial tax credit program, and I know last month's information session was all about the commercial tax credit program, but I do like to mention it here just because they kind of work in tandem sometimes. New York State and the federal government offer a 20% commercial rehabilitation tax credit for buildings that are income producing. The property also has to be listed in the National Register. If you are applying for the New York State commercial credit, it also has to meet that census tract qualification. And again, the rehabilitation has to meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. The way that the The credit is calculated is a little bit different. The way the application threshold is a little bit different. For the commercial project, it's calculated by using something called the substantial rehabilitation test, as opposed to that $5,000 figure that the homeowner program has. And your project is additionally reviewed by our partners at the National Park Service, as well as our technical unit at the State Historic Preservation Office. It is possible to combine the credit program. So say you occupy your building as a homeowner, but you also use it for an income producing purpose. It is possible to combine them. However, the process is a little bit more involved, and this is something that we would want to consider with you on a case-by-case basis. You'll probably need a larger project team, but it has been done before. So this is something that we can answer questions about if it applies to you. So this is what the form looks like. These forms are available on our website. We can also email them to you. We recently updated these. I think in 2019 they were updated, and it's very simple. The application has 3 parts, but parts 1 and 2 are actually submitted together. So on the form, we'll ask for your name, your address, your contact information. There's a program checklist that will ask the questions about eligibility. So is the building listed in the registers? Is it located in a qualifying census tract? Are you spending at least $5,000? Is at least 5% of that project expenditure on the exterior? Does your home have an income producing component? Has the work started? So we'll go through all those questions. The processing fee for parts 1 and 2, as I mentioned earlier, is always $25 unless you meet the income qualification of your adjusted gross income being below $60,000. The second piece of the application is where you actually describe the work that you're going to be doing. So we break it up into different sections usually. You can use as many pages as you like. You can handwrite on the form, you can type it and send it in. We actually are in the process of making it so that this form and payment can be entirely submitted online to our office, because we know that especially in the age of COVID, that sometimes doing things electronically is just a little bit easier. So hopefully that will be live in the next couple months, and it'll make things a little bit more simple. But if you have a specific area of your home, such as the roof, the chimney, painting, as you see here, then we would ask for a little bit of information about what the existing condition is. So is your roof completely shot? It's at the end of its life, or is it just a little bit leaky in places and needs some repair work? And then you'll write down the work that you're proposing to do. So are you proposing replacement? If so, what are you replacing with? And the estimated cost. Now, the really awesome thing about this is that you don't need formal contractor estimates in order to make an application to us. So if you estimate that your roof replacement is going to cost $14,000, that is just fine. We are never going to ask for receipts. We are never going to ask for formal invoices. It's just very important that when you actually get started on your project, that you keep very good records and that you maintain all of your receipts for your tax purposes. But we'll never ask for that stuff. So when you're in the very early stages of thinking about a project, that's a good time to fill out an application. It is very essential that you send in photographs, and we can certainly take those electronically. We also accept CDs and flash drives. Things like Dropbox and WeTransfer generally also work for us. Basically, with images, we're just looking to get a sense of what's going on at your property, because unfortunately, we're not going to be able to visit you at your home. We definitely want to see the overall building. This also helps the survey and National Register unit certify that the building is listed in the registers, and it helps us get a sense of character defining features. We definitely want to see before photographs so that we can get a sense of some of those deteriorated work items that you're proposing to do. And floor plans with photo keys are also very helpful, especially if you're doing a major renovation project. It doesn't have to be something that's professionally prepared. Just a simple sketch on a piece of paper is completely fine. If you are proposing replacement of a historic feature like windows or doors or your roof or siding is another one, then we definitely are going to want to see a specification for a product that you're using. So, a proposed window replacement specification from the window company or a shop drawing, something like that. These are things that if we need, we will certainly ask for, but it's always good to be prepared and send in your materials in as complete a format as you can. So when you submit parts 1 and 2 to our office, what happens is it will go to the Survey and National Register unit first. So I have a series of cohorts that take care of the same counties that I do, and they verify that these homes that are applying for the program are listed in the registers first. And then the applications come to me and I will review all of the technical work that you're doing. So once we review and approve parts 1 and 2 of your application, we will issue a formal letter that basically says, thank you for your application. You may go ahead and start your project. Sometimes these letters will have conditions in them. So things that you and your contractor should be aware of or mindful of. It can specify that we would prefer if something is done in a certain way in order to qualify for the program. This will be where I might reference some technical advice that will help with the project that you're doing. If your project substantially changes after you start, or you have to add another major work item, or you forget something, or something changes, we have amendment sheets that can be submitted at any time, and those can actually be submitted to our office via email. As I mentioned earlier, you should definitely keep receipts and approval letters with your records. You definitely want to keep good records for this project because ultimately you will need all of that information when you go to claim the credit. If at any point you feel like something is going horribly wrong with your project, believe it or not, it does happen, and you're worried about the credit status or approval from our office, definitely stop and give us a call. We can certainly step in and help as best as we can. But basically, never be afraid to reach out and ask for advice or assistance throughout this process. So once we issue an approval letter, that is when you're free to go ahead and get started doing your work. And sometimes we might hear back from you with a completed project a couple months down the line. It might be towards the end of the year. It might be a year from now, 2 years from now. It really depends on your situation and how long you plan to work on your property. But when you're all done and you're ready to claim your credit, that is when you will submit part 3 of the application. And it's very similar to the part 2 form. You're going to simply say, I said I was going to replace my roof. I've gone and replaced my roof. Here's a picture of my new roof. Here's how much it cost. It's very important that the expenditures that you list on your part 3 form are accurate, because that we will use that information to create your certificate of completion that you can use to claim the credit. So we want to have an accurate representation of how much money you've spent. There is an additional fee for part 3, so it's $25 for parts 1 and 2, and for part 3, it depends on how much you've spent on your total project. It ranges from $25 up to $475. So if you're confused about the fee schedule, that is something that we can help you with. But if you meet that income exemption, then again, you're exempt from paying that processing fee. There are some times where, projects can't be approved or the credit can't be claimed because the quality of the work doesn't adhere to the standards of the program. So completing work that doesn't adhere to the standards or ignores a condition that we put in your letter is grounds for denial. Lots of demolition without documenting properly or explaining, completely obliterating or changing intact historic floor plans, removing significant character defining features. Those are things that you really want to avoid. We will try our hardest to make sure that this doesn't happen. It's all about good communication and working directly with our office, but it has happened before, so we have to talk about it when we give these presentations. And at the end, I just have, you know, a couple examples. We have some folks in different areas of the Southern Tier. I know this property is in Owego. We've had some areas that have suffered major damage from storms, and it's a really good program to use when you're doing a rebuilding or a renovation project after a major event. We've also had folks that have used the program and they've taken a building, you know, back to life from vacancy, because there's a lot of rehab work that qualifies there. So these are just a couple photos, and I saw we had lots of questions coming in on the chat, and we will go ahead and that.
Wow.
Lots of different, I have lots of different photos. And now we'll go on to Q&A. But while we have Q&A, this is my email address as well as my phone number. I am happy to answer questions at any point. I know some of you, I've definitely, you know, you've submitted applications before or we've talked before. And so it's really nice to see some of you here. Those of you that I haven't met yet, I really look forward to talking with you. I love that I get to work with homeowners on this program. And I hope that you're encouraged to apply. So I guess we'll get to some questions. So the first question that I have here is, for multifamily properties, does it have to be some kind of owner occupied? And that is a really good question. Yes, you have to occupy the property in some capacity in order to qualify. That's why it's called the New York State Homeowner Rehabilitation Tax Credit. So it has to be your property that you live in. We have folks that have, you know, vacation properties that qualify for the program. So maybe you live in one area, but you own a historic property that you occupy a few months out of the year in a different section of the state. That certainly would qualify as long as you reside in it at some point. So if you own a multifamily property and you completely rent that out, that would be more of a program, a property for the commercial program. So you definitely have to occupy at least some part of the property. And we have some folks who are interested in copies of the presentation. We will definitely get you those. So we have a question specifically about historic districts. And I'm sure that Janna has some information about historic districts. So, but we can talk a little bit about the National Register, and then depending on where you're located, I can certainly send you to the survey and National Register person at our office to talk a little bit more about that. The National Register of Historic Places is another preservationist tool that we have in the toolbox. It is a formal register that was created under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. It is a formal listing of properties that have been designated as historic. So the first way to qualify for the National Register is that the property has to be at least 50 years old. Things are nominated to the register for a series of different reasons. It's either because they are consistent with broad patterns of history, they're really excellent works of architecture, they're associated with significant people, or there are archaeological concerns that will nominate properties to the Register of Historic Places. In New York State, we have a lot of historic districts as well as individually listed buildings. So if a building is individually listed, it means it has its own register listing. It is significant enough that it can be, stand on its own historically. In a historic district, the district might be nominated because of one of those criteria. So maybe it's a district of perfect craftsman style bungalows that qualify because of their architecture. Maybe it is a significant district because it was, 19th century worker housing in a specific city that is significant because it's associated with that broad pattern of history, something like that. So there's different ways that things are nominated to the register. And certainly, if you have questions about nominating a district or a property in your community, then send me a quick email and we can get you talking to the right person at our office who would handle that. But that's a, like a very, very condensed version of preservation districts. This is another really good question that we have. Can the homeowner do their own work, or does it need to be done by a contractor? DIYing is fun, it's great. And you can certainly do work on your own property. You cannot get credit for your time. So in that case, if you were going to do a painting project on your own, you could claim credit for the expenditure of the paint and the supplies that you will use, but you can't claim credit for your time in the same way that a contractor could. So that's a really good question. How frequently can qualifying census tract status change? Changes every couple of years. We actually use something called the American Community Survey. And so we have had questions recently about how the most recent 2020 census has affected our numbers. I think the last time the American Community Survey was updated was 2018. So it's a little bit different. But if you're concerned about that, then we can look specifically at where you're coming from and talk about that. But it changes every few years, not terribly frequently, I think. Yes, vinyl windows don't qualify for the tax credit. I'm sorry to report. This next question is about folks completing restoration work prior to historic designation. We can discuss that. It depends on the situation. Generally, we can't approve work that has happened outside of the tax year. We don't want to approve work that has happened way prematurely. If it was something like an emergency situation or there was a local approval that was granted, we might be able to work specifically with the property owner on that. I would say just, certainly reach out to our office if you have concerns about the timing and when work was completed. And so that, I think those are the questions that I have for now. Janna, do you have some other things to add or?
One more question just popped up. Does landscaping work qualify?
Gotcha. No, unfortunately, landscaping work doesn't qualify. Things that are separate from the building. So things like fences that don't touch the building, lighting that's remote from the building, landscaping work, that doesn't qualify. Sometimes there are certain things that have to happen that are outside of the footprint, but they're directly connected to the systems of a building. So if the one example that I'm thinking of is if you had to have your sewer lines replaced, that would involve, tearing up the yard in front of your property to replace the sewer lines. Replacing the sewer lines in that circumstance would count because it's directly connected to the house. Landscaping work to mitigate that or go along with that wouldn't count. So sorry.
All right. Well, if you have any other questions, please type those in the chat box. For the part 3, do we submit copies of receipts?
Nope. You don't have to submit copies of receipts. You just have to make sure that the information that you put on your form matches the receipts that you have, because I think good record keeping is always something that you want to adhere by when it comes to taxes. So, but we will never ask you to submit copies of receipts to our office.
Are there, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can, yep.
Okay, great. Do you have restrictions about the fate of the property? You've spoken about how you're using the property, your ownership. You have rental income? Do you have some use of the property personally? including possible commercial. But my question really is another bigger view. So are you restricting people to own the property? Can they sell the property?
Yeah, that's a really good
does it-
question.
Okay,
So the program is meant for homeowners. You definitely have to own the home. You have to
Yeah.
reside in the home even for, part of the year. There are some rules that are designated by New York State Tax and Finance as opposed to our office that have to do with selling the property. So if you sell the property within 2 years of claiming the credit, a portion or all of that credit is recaptured. And there is some information that we can direct you to from New York Tax and Finance that has rules and regulations about filing for the credit, and that informational handout talks about the recapture period. So you definitely have to, it is designed for homeowners who intend to, stay in their properties for at least a few years.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right. So
And does it, is there, my home is zoned commercial because it was the country store, but it's a residence. Does that matter?
No, if you use it as a residence, if it is your primary, if you occupy that building as a homeowner, then it should qualify.
Right.
When we say commercial for these tax credit programs, whether it's the federal credit program or the New York State credit program, if we say commercial, we mean income producing as opposed to zoning. So I know we've gotten
Yeah.
questions before, is it doesn't necessarily match up. I know it gets a little confusing because it's the same word,
Yeah.
but when we say commercial, we mean income producing.